At this time, we hear from Rabbi Sheinkopf.
By the way, it took me 6 years to get through rabbinic school, not 5, but I did have a baby in the midst of that. But Scott and Natalie did too, and we won't mention that. He got through still in 5 years. True story. 20 years ago, I was lying in bed in Houston in the morning, and the phone was ringing, and I let the answering machine answer. You can tell how long ago that was that we had answering machines. And this is what I heard. Lara, it's your mother. I'm on the way to Providence. Your brother had a baby in the Marriott Hotel. That's a true story. She did. She had a baby in the Marriott Hotel. Everybody's fine, thank God. But that happened. And that was September 2nd, 2001. 9 days later, I was driving to work, my toddler son in his car seat, NPR on the radio, and just as I pulled into the parking lot, I heard the news of the first plane crashing into the World Trade Center. I was processing the news as I unclipped my son from his car seat and carried him into daycare. By the time I made it to my office, the second plane had crashed, and it was only an hour or two later that I was picking that same child up from daycare, bringing him home, where I, like everyone else, turned on the television and sat there horrified by what I saw unfolding on the screen. You need to understand something. Just that morning, before the world started to fall apart, I had been obsessing about the fact that my 16-month-old son had yet to walk. He was a healthy baby, happy, but he had not yet taken his first steps, and I was starting to get concerned. I was about to make an appointment with someone to get him evaluated, but now all I could think about was what I was seeing on the TV screen. Like the rest of the world, I was transfixed, trying to make sense of what I was seeing and what I was hearing. They kept playing and replaying these horrifying few seconds when the plane crashes through the first tower. It even seemed to me that they zoomed in on that moment as the day wore on, and the plane grew larger and larger, eventually filling up the entire screen with this moving image. It literally and figuratively eclipsed everything else happening in the world at that moment. So there I was in this little room with the big screen TV, and my toddler playing directly beneath the screen as I sat across from him on the couch. And then it happened. I was still staring at the TV, waiting for my husband to return home. The phone was ringing, and I was about to answer it when my son, the 16-month-old, who had only pulled up on a coffee table until that point to a standing position, started toddling toward me for the very first time. Suddenly, this beautiful, drooling, smiling baby with his arms stretched toward me took his first steps, silhouetted against the images of the Twin Towers as they burned. As he fell into my arms, I was overcome with emotion at the juxtaposition of these two events. The world was burning. My son was walking. Lives were ending. This life was starting. It seemed to me then and now that this, in fact, was precisely what is meant by the words we just read in Deuteronomy, when Moses is recalling the moment at Sinai when the commandments are given to the Israelites, and he says, I set before you blessing and curse. Choose life so that you may live. It was clear to me then and now. The cataclysmic event of that day played out on the TV screen before me was the curse, and the little drooling, smiling toddler walking toward me for the first time was blessing and life. I could choose to follow either. I could remain in despair about the world and its sadness or invest in the future. Both were happening at the same time. And in these 20 years, here's what I've learned. They always do. In 9 days, our own family went from miraculous birth of a child to the horror of 9/11. And on that very same day, the shock of what unfolded to the relief of my child's first steps. It always happens this way. The rise and fall of good fortune is inevitable. Loss and joy often happen in rapid succession, and we are shattered and then healed, and then we do it all over again. And that is the other thing I've learned in these 20 years. The world will break your heart 10 ways to Sunday, over and over again. That is a guarantee. But we all do our best to avoid it. While specific events may be random acts or bad luck, encountering sorrow and heartbreak is an unavoidable part of being human. If there is a plan, heartbreak is part of it. And choosing life means choosing to remake our lives in the aftermath of tragedy and heartbreak. God sets life before us as a choice, but the choice is not, hey, universe, I'd like it to be easy and not hard. Thank you very much. The choice resides in how we respond to the inevitable heartbreak that comes with being human. To choose life means choosing to reconstruct something from the wreckage of our lives, and to do so repeatedly. We mourn our broken hearts because it feels like we're whole, and now we're broken. And if you choose broken or whole, you'd probably want to choose whole. But interestingly, in Jewish tradition, a broken heart might actually be preferable. As the Kotzker Rabbi said, nothing is as whole as a broken heart. What does that mean? Why would broken heart be whole, and why would it be more whole than an unbroken one? I think it's because we are meant to create something new from what has been broken, and this new mended and refashioned heart is more whole. There's a Japanese art form called kintsugi, which I'm sure I'm not pronouncing correctly, but it entails taking broken pieces of pottery and turning them into something new, and often something even more beautiful than what that piece was before it broke. In choosing to live, we are forced to be similarly creative with our own hearts. They were made to be broken and put back together again. In this sense, the cycle of heartbreak and healing is in fact a celebration of our God-given ability to create. From wholeness to brokenness, and then to wholeness again, but not the wholeness we started with. After all, how could we be the same as before we were broken? The world was reshaped by the events of 9/11, and we too are reshaped by the heartbreak in our own lives. This cycle from wholeness to heartbreak and despair and then back to wholeness again is the music of life, and it is a melody our tradition knows by heart. A tune that can be heard in the calls of the shofar. We start with this one long call of tekiah, which represents the wholeness we start with, and then we hear teruah, a series of short staccato blasts, like the broken pieces. And then shvarim, 9 slightly longer blasts that some say sound like a wailing or a crying, and then back to one long blast of tekiah, wholeness again. These are not independent of each other. They are in a specific order, and together they comprise the melody of what it means to be human. It is a painful but a triumphant song, and one that Maimonides says is supposed to awaken us from our lack of awareness. I used to think that this meant it was supposed to make us stop and become aware of our sinfulness. But now I think it's more than that. The shofar awakens us to our mistakes, and it also reminds us that we can heal, and that when we do the work, we arrive at a different and perhaps a more beautiful wholeness. Nothing is as whole as a broken heart. We are taught that when God created the world, it was left undone, so that human beings could be partners with God in the ongoing act of creation. So we are left with the work of refashioning our own hearts, and in so doing, we are choosing to create ourselves, recreate ourselves. Not to extend this metaphor too far, but seriously, there is much longer tekiah at the very end, a tekiah gedola, as if to say the intact heart we started with will exceed the one that we have after. We have walked through the ruins of our lives, picked up the pieces of our shattered hearts and made them into something bigger and more beautiful and definitely more whole. There's lots of evidence to suggest that our tradition venerates a broken heart. The phrase Rosh Hashanah does not appear in the Torah. Instead, the Torah refers to the new year as Yom Truah or Zichron Truah. Truah, that series of short notes played in rapid succession, suggesting that it is in fact the broken blast of the shofar which is the essence of this day. Brokenness is not evidence of a mistake or weakness. It is, according to the Jewish mystics, the starting point of all creation. The Kabbalists believed that in the beginning, God's presence filled the universe, leaving no room for anything else. In order to make room for the world, God had to contract in a process called tzimtzum, and in that newfound space, darkness was created. God then poured stream of divine light into 10 vessels, but when these vessels are unable to contain the awesome primordial energy, they break, showering holy sparks everywhere. Human beings were created to find these splinters of divine light and to spend our lives helping God gather these broken pieces together, repairing them or making tikkun in the world and tikkun in ourselves. With this story as our foundation, it's clear that neither the world nor any of us were meant to be perfect, nor is any life free of heartbreak. Instead, this brokenness that makes repairing necessary is precisely what gives us meaning and hope. Our lives are like symphonies or epic poems, and heartbreak is an unavoidable stanza, but it is not the only stanza. The work of our lives is writing and rewriting the story, revising the conclusions of our lives to account for the disappointments and the losses that preceded it. The past year and a half have reminded us of something that has always been true. We are all fragile and in need of repair. Jewish tradition reminds us that our task is not to figure out why our world, nor any of us in it, needs to be repaired. Our task is simply to be immersed in the work of repairing it and to find meaning in that work. There's a great potential in seeing that we are all cracked and broken. As Rav Leonard Cohen wrote, "Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." To remember the brokenness is to be reminded of our task as humans. Our purpose has always been to seek connection with each other, and that connection is inspired by our fragility. The hardest part for me, at least, is that once your heart is broken, you tend to try and avoid it happening again. You try to outrun the pain and the heartache, but if you're fortunate to live long enough, you realize you cannot outrun the inevitable pain of living. The great Yiddish writer Isaac Bashevis Singer once was asked if he believed in free will, and his response was, "Do I have a choice?" We have no choice when it comes to experiencing loss. Life begins with birth, but it can begin again with heartbreak. The longer you live, the more aware you become, and the more heartache you experience, the more difficult it is to be brave enough to pick up the pieces and move forward. It is a very tricky balance, to be guided rather than driven by the past, allowing its lessons to inform, but not stop you from moving forward. The greatest thing for me about working in a school, Scott invited you to stay here all day, and I was thinking, I always stay here all day. But the greatest thing about working here is that it is impossible to get stuck in the past when all around you kids are dreaming and preparing and planning for the future. They're just as aware of the cracks, but they are not as weighted down by it. They continue to lean forward into the future, somehow able to carry both the pain and the disappointment of the world, along with the hope that it can be better. Like Moses, who never discards the broken fragments of the first set of tablets he smashed, we cannot disregard what is broken. It's part of our foundation. The broken pieces reassembled with the insight that is born of loss become the heart that is more whole. Perhaps this is why Moses carries these broken pieces alongside the finished tablets in the Mishkan, the portable tabernacle. The ark could not be complete without both, and neither would we be complete without carrying both what is broken and what is whole into the new year. Gemar Chatima Tova, may you be sealed in the book of life.